Welcome to the MusicWideOpen podcast
The place for an honest and thought-provoking conversation
about music,
business,
life,
technology,
and the future,
for curious music enthusiasts.
and musicians seeking personal growth. I'm Ingo Wunder.
And I am Paulina Wunder. There are millions of pianists out there at various levels. There is also a vast group of piano music enthusiasts. There are plenty of real specialists and so-called specialists whose daily bread is commenting on piano playing. Yet, there is very little space for the subject of sound, the piano sound. What is a good sound? What is a good piano? How to distinguish whether a beautiful sound is created by a pianist's fingers or it's simply the quality of a piano? And how to determine whether an ugly sound is the fault of a pianist or of a piano. Also, what's real and what's imagined. I guess you love this subject, don't you?
I do, because it's a very tricky one and a very beautiful one at the same time.
I have the feeling that the majority of people, and I repeat, the majority, not all, and actually the majority of pianists and those people who talk about the piano performances on a regular basis, treat the whole culture of sound as it were totally unimportant. They don't know much about it, which they sometimes even reveal by making false statements or expressing uninformed opinions. And even worse, they sometimes assume that pianos of certain piano brands are equal in quality, which is completely wrong because there are so many factors to be considered. So what is it? Let's talk about the technical side first.
Exactly, there are these two main layers. There are more than that, but two: this the mechanical part and the musical part, which is much more important, in fact. But as you said, it's in many ways similar, of course, to so many subjects outside music and everywhere, that people just empty phrase a lot, as we say. So they use the right words and don't really know what's behind them. But I think the main problem of the piano sound is that the piano is simply a percussive instrument. I know sounds so simple, but it is true. Because what is a beautiful sound? What we think it is or should be. It's a singing sound, as Chopin, Liszt, and all these great people wrote already their letters, and what then pianists worked on over centuries, and the technology of the piano has got much better. So, but it's a singing sound. It's to impersonate a beautiful singer, right? And there's the problem we have, because we have a percussive instrument that produces a tone by basically hitting a string, and it's on-off, sort of, with of course a pedal, but we will come there. So this beauty in sound is something that is somehow way beyond that percussive thing. But let's start with the mechanical layer. I mean, we have a piano, and if you take Renner actions or Steinway actions, which is very much related, then it's basically like this. The finger presses the key, right? The weapon in the action moves upward. It transfers the motion upward through the jack. The jack pushes the hammer. The hammer travels towards the string. The jack escapes, allowing the hammer to swing freely and actually hit the string. And the hammer immediately bounces back, preventing blockage, right? Because you had, with the beautiful invention of the repetition, of the quick repetition, in modern pianos, we need the hammer to be free. And then after the hammer hits the string, we have the damping control, the pedal, which kind of lifts from the string and allows it to vibrate freely, and with this we can control a lot of things in legato and so forth. But this is basically it. So you have a hammer hitting a string like a drum.
Yes.
And and then of course it depends, and there where the great piano technicians come in and stuff. There are loads of screws and small parts in the action that you can actually regulate. You can regulate the let-off, the repetition, all these tiny aspects. You can regulate the dampers, which is a horrible thing to do for a technician, and good ones do it, but only good ones, because you can ruin everything. And there are many more things. I will not go into there because it's not a masterclass of piano technicians, which I'm absolutely not a master of. I understand many things, but I let it be done by the real masters.
But the really good ones.
The really good ones, such as Stefan Knüpfer, for example.
Exactly.
He's an amazing piano technician. Anyway, so this is the thing. So we have this percussive thing that makes a beautiful sound if it's a good piano, which means if the vibration is well, if the overtones are set correctly, if it does what it should do, but it's still the tone itself can be nice from the piano, from the mechanical point of view, if all the settings are correct, as I said, if the hammer has the right consistency of the felt, and if everything is like springy and nice, then the tone can be very well if you play just one tone. But that's just the mechanical side of it. So you have one tone that sounds beautiful or not. And by the way, this is very tricky because many musicians have no clue what an actual nice piano tone is, like one single tone.
That's true. I realized that.
It has to be long, it has to be open, it has to have this special something, but that's an art in itself. This is where people like Stefan Knüpfer come in. Okay, but you have this then, a beautiful piano tone, but then you have to play music. And this is where the actual piano sound of a pianist actually comes in, because you have to then take this percussive single tone and produce a melody of it, have a nice legato, have a nice speaking expression, have all this, which is directly connected with interpretation, with phrasing, with micro timing, with articulation, with all these things that good pianists have to do, and that all together is the piano sound.
Basically, one cannot forget that a piano doesn't exist as in one entity. It's 88 single keys that each can be completely different in their setting.
Exactly, and each of these 88 keys have hundreds of parts that make that action that I just very coarsely described. But as I said, this is just the easy thing, let's say. Although this easy thing is very difficult nowadays because you have very few excellent piano technicians in the world that can do this single tone or set the single tone that well that it's really sounding beautiful and have all the overtones and everything.
In other words, to prepare the piano perfectly for the pianist.
Yes.
Because this is not in hands of partly it is in hands of the pianist, and this is why it's so difficult then to sometimes.
This is correct, because then it's the pianist's skill to, if you play on a bad piano, that's why Richter was quoted. I don't know if he really said that, but probably there are no bad pianos, just bad pianists.
Well, yeah, I think it's a bit humorous.
It's a bit humorous, and it's in many cases, of course, not true, because also. I don't know if you, this was my Formula One time years ago, Michael Schumacher, also him, one of the best drivers.
Times when you were watching.
When I was watching it, he was the best driver ever, but if you give him a VW Käfer to ride and other ones have a Formula One car, then he will also not win. Yeah. But if you give him a similar car, then he will beat you driving. This is with pianists the same. So if you have a certain level of piano, then there are indeed no bad pianos, because a good pianist knows each and every key. He knows after he, of course, played an hour on it or something, you know which key needs to be struck softly, which needs to be struck a bit harsher, so to make it even, although it's not even. But after all this is quite technical what we're saying, and even and regulation and all the thing. But after all that's, let's say in an ideal case, that's all great, then it is where it becomes spiritual. because the greatest pianists in the past, and some also living ones, have indeed their own piano sound. They have their personal sound, which, if you are really objective about it,
it is even not possible if you're...
This is the thing. I mean, I use the word objective because it's sort of, we can never be objective, humans. But if you think a Koczalski, a Friedman, a Kaufmann or whatever, even though a person like me with my age has never heard these guys live, and those people that did said that their recordings are of course only a shadow of this, what they actually could do with the sound. But if one has the imagination and, for example, has great recordings already of people like Horowitz or so, then one can imagine, and one has a lot of experience in the concert hall and puts this together, then one can imagine what these also old bad audio quality recordings actually reveal. So long story short, they do have their own sound, yet on all the recordings that we have, they play on different pianos. Exactly. So they play on a Bösendorfer, they play on a Steinway, they play on Yamaha, whatever, and you still know it's them.
Exactly, that's the quality.
So, and this is of course where the musical layer comes in. All these micro timings, this expressive playing that actually makes the piano sound. But having said this, all these great pianists that I'm now thinking of, they did indeed know all this, what I just briefly mentioned before of the mechanical part, and they could even out all the flaws of the piano that well that it then sounds really well. So it's really a mixture of this technical layer and the musical layer, although this musical spiritual layer is probably much stronger, because even if you have, as I said, Horowitz plays on a super out of tune piano by Scriabin, I think there's such a video, and even there you hear that it's Horowitz playing, although it's a terrible piano, and it's, you see.
And nowadays you often have a flawless new piano, and
they all sound the same.
Yes.
So you can only imagine if such people of the past would have had these wonderful pianos of nowadays, what they would have done with it.
Of course, one cannot forget, and many people forget about it. You have a company, let's say X, although we should probably use the company X because that's not a company, not a piano company. ABC, let's say, a piano company ABC. Let's say it's a renowned piano company, and people know it, and they immediately assume, that's ABC, it must be good, no problem with that one. And they forget about this very important factor, that it always depends of a copy of this piano, how it's being maintained, what kind of a technician it has, and so on. So there are very many factors. One cannot assume this is what's actually one of the common mistakes that I observe a lot of people do, is this assumption that this or the other company has this or that standard of their instruments.
Correct. I mean, it's a living thing. You're talking about wood, you're talking about different kinds of wood, and different times when the wood was actually cut and then prepared and put into a piano or made a piano out of it. All these things matter greatly.
And the climate, then, if it's a tropical climate, for example,
Exactly, how it's stored, how it's what's the life of the piano. For example, my personal piano, I'm proud of that since I got it in a new state, it never had any kind of fluctuation of humidity, of temperature. And that's why it's great because it kind of, you treat it like a human being, right? Mm.
And we know that that very often it is like that in many concert halls that get funds every second, let's say, season to buy a new piano. They spend a lot of money. Well, this is not their own money, but still, it is. They spend a lot of money. They buy a new piano. They are very proud of it, and they store it somewhere in a climate-controlled room, or give it to a technician that doesn't have much clue. And
Exactly.
this is where the whole drama for then pianists starts.
Exactly.
It starts.
And even before what you described is like which piano is chosen.
Exactly.
There were many times it's a horrible decision, and people think it's a great one just because it has a good name. And that's the thing. Like every piano is different, and great pianists know that, and they hear that. They can, yeah.
Let's hear maybe talk now maybe about what a good piano is for a, let's say, a normal human being, a normal person, on a very basic level, I want to say. Because I will give an example. For example, during competitions, and there's a piano selection, right? So during the piano selection, at the piano competitions, competitors often choose not the piano that sounds the best, whatever the best is, of course, but the piano that is the lightest to play. And also, by the way, pianists during the piano selection before a concert, if there is, of course, more than one piano to select from. And you know that the best, although you're one of those people who will choose rather an older piano if the piano has more soul than a new one and technically flawless, but without character.
Exactly.
And here we have this, I don't know if this is the lack of education as well among pianists, that they are selecting mostly this would just plays quick.
I think it's a mixture of two things: of stress, fear, and lack of education.
So
Simply.
you're suicidal basically, because you choose always the side. You see, the pianos that are.
Well, you see, like
full of soul.
not always when it's possible. Still, like there's a threshold. There's a threshold where the piano is. I would love to play the one with the soul-y sound, or with a sound that has a soul, but then the action is so horrible because it hasn't been done. Anyway, most of the time it happens in places where the technicians are maybe not the greatest. And then this piano, this old, hasn't been worked on for years, and then it really plays so horribly that you simply cannot play it well. Then, of course, I choose also the new one, but with a heavy heart, because it.
Well, let's put it this way. Excuse me that I interrupt you. Some new ones have, of course, for the record, good ones.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not like this that all new pianos are bad. No.
Absolutely not.
And we also don't know how the new pianos of now will be in 60, 70 years, right? If they're maintained well and so on. So I'm absolutely not saying that everything in the past was better. No. Just on average, it's like this, and I know that for a fact, at a university level or leading universities in the world, there's simply the knowledge of what a piano sound really is on these two levels, like on the mechanical and the musical, is unfortunately not at all that what it was, 70, 80, 90 years ago. And that's a fact. So it's not a topic that much. I know that myself, because I was lucky to have that topic with people like Stefan Knüpfer, who was by mere coincidence my piano technician since 15, since I got my piano, and he's the only technician that ever touched my piano. But of course, at the beginning, when he started working with me, I had no clue whatsoever about anything. So there were like hours and hours every time when he came to make my piano, where we talked exactly about this, about what piano sound actually is, what is in the pianist's hands, what's in the piano hands and stuff. And this is just not taught. On average, again, there would be always great examples.
But very little. I unfortunately, I have to say that I'm just an observer here. But since I've been traveling with you everywhere, and I experienced basically most of the piano technicians, or how they approach the instruments, there are very little people that have this deep passion. If I may, I will throw an anecdote here about Stefan. You remember, that was probably like 8 or 9 years ago. You scheduled a meeting with him in his workshop in Vienna back then, because you know him for a long time, as you said, and you always like to learn from him, and he was supposed to teach you some particular things. I don't remember exactly.
Voicing and...
Yeah, exactly. But I remember we went there together, and I thought to myself, I will say hello. I will stay for half an hour and then I will leave you both in peace.
Go to a nice cafe.
I will not disturb. I will go to a gallery, museum, or whatever, shopping in cafe. I stayed for 4 hours with you because I couldn't stop listening to him. I'm not a pianist. I'm not even a musician. And I couldn't stop listening about the overtones, about the soundboard, about tiny little details. His contagious passion just pulled me into a completely fascinating world.
Yeah.
This is absolutely amazing.
It is, but you know that. But we are talking here just only about the technical part, like
Yes.
the mechanical part, right? Which is already so fascinating. But when we were talking about the young pianists that don't have that kind of knowledge anymore, we were talking also about piano teachers, that musical side, that microtiming, phrasing, articulation, all this stuff, pedaling, very important, for example, how that affects the personal sound is not taken care of, because I know on average it isn't,
Yes,
because
it isn't.
first of all, people don't have it, so that's already the proof on average. But I know that also from personal experience, that if you talk about these kind of things with, let's call it normal piano teachers, then they look at you funny or say some word, some empty phrase that kind of fits, but you know that he or she doesn't know because
which is terrible, because it's like let's say a voice teacher would not really care how to take care of the voice.
Yes. But this is the reason why you said rightly so, that I'm sometimes really surprised which pianos are chosen at competitions. And I was also when I was younger, by the way, because of that upbringing of caring about sound. And also about the explanations then from the pianists why they chose a certain piano, where you know this is all kind of BS, and then the reason why they chose it is just because it was lighter and it was easy to play and no stress. You know.
So you can slide basically on the keyboard.
Yeah.
There's another thing, of course, if we're talking about this aspect of choosing the piano as well, the piano bench and the height of the piano bench, because every pianist sits differently.
Very
and as
important.
well, there are a lot of pianists who are sitting quite high because they like to attack the keyboard from up, which gives
Because
them
again,
more,
it's simply physically easier to play from above.
you attack
Loud,
you
right?
attack.
I mean, you cannot really work on the sound creation, on how you
Details.
touch the key that well. But if you sit lower, this is not to say that if you sit low, it's good. Not. It depends on your stature, on
Of course.
how on your legs,
Well,
on your posture.
For your statue, you're sitting quite low, and you used to sit even lower. Now you're sitting a little bit higher.
Yeah.
But this way, I guess, and Horowitz, I guess he was the same. He was judging how he was having his hand.
Absolutely,
I'm not sure how.
Many, Glenn Gould, although he had a completely different technique than
no,
Horowitz, and but one has to really say there is a certain old school of piano technique, and there are certain rules, like how the weight is distributed, how the angles have to be in order for the tone to be, crispy, nice.
Pity that in this episode we don't have a camera, because you're showing so much with your hands and fingers.
and so also that kind of knowledge is, of course, in many places completely lost. Sometimes it's still there. And as I said, therefore everybody will sit slightly different, but these ground laws will be
Applied.
these root laws will be the same. And therefore, again, coming back to the initial topic, the older generation of pianists that we have unfortunately only bad recordings of most of the time.
But technically, or
that's what I mean.
This is what you mean.
Yeah, I mean,
we have to say
badly sounding, like audio quality.
Great recordings, but technically not
great
flawless.
musical recordings, but exactly. They all had that kind of own technical ability, understanding of the pianos, by the way. I mean, people like one even doesn't have to look far. Hoffman, or invented stuff for Steinway. So they knew how the stuff worked. Which is also something that young pianists often don't know exactly how
They are not even curious, I feel.
Yeah. and because everything is sort of done for them anyway. Yeah, and all this mixture of that is then creating this personal sound and also the magic, because then you have the sensation when you hear such a combination of these things that we are discussing, then you have kind of this almost orgasmic listening experience, and you have like, wow, that's it, you know. And
yes, that's true.
And this is what music should be.
That's true. There's another thing, of course, the concert hall's acoustics, because we know that each concert hall has its own unique acoustics. So the same piano in different halls might sound quite different. Then there are halls where the acoustics a pianist experiences on stage differ totally from the acoustics experienced by the public. And on top of that, the acoustics in an empty hall during rehearsal and in a full hall during a concert often differ in how sound is projected.
Absolutely, and this is many people talk about that. I recently heard Christian Zimmermann as well, not lately, but an older interview of his where he touches exactly that the difference between recordings and concert hall experiences in terms of sound, because you just never really know unless you really know the hall well, which means that you are a listener listening to concerts in there and at the same time a performer playing in that hall, so that you know exactly which row sounds how, and so because each row can sound different.
That's true. There are some halls I can say that for a fact, because I attended most of your concerts, which we can count in hundreds, so, and as well rehearsals, so it's really like that. There are some halls that are, we talked often after the concerts in the past years, you felt not so good on stage, and I was saying afterwards, well, what do you want? I mean, it sounds great. And on the other hand, sometimes you felt very well on stage, and I was just amazed how bad the acoustics of the hall is and how it can change during the rehearsal and
exactly
in the
concert. That's of course directly affecting also the piano sound, obviously, and also the judgment of the piano sound. That brings me to the other thing, because the next layer of all that is how the listener actually perceives the sound, right? And there we go directly into the brain. Of course, there are so many processes that even neuroscientists don't really understand how complex music is processed. And many things have to do with past experiences, with sensory information that you yourself as a listener took in and can kind of visualize internally. Mm-hmm. This is, of course, on both sides. If you're a pianist, like these old school pianists, they have a sound in their brain. Like they know before they create the sound, they know how it has to sound. This is why I called it spiritual at first, because this is kind of this where you don't know how even great legato is created, because technically you cannot play legato on a piano, because it's, of course, you can fake it with pedal and you can kind of overlap the frequencies so that it's...
You can and you cannot.
But we can still play wonderful legato, right? Yeah. I mean, we can hold the fingers and we can micro time it like this, that the fingers really, leave the first key when you press the second and make it really nice. But this is going too much in detail. What I want to say is that before you do all that, as a pianist, you have your mental representation of how it should sound, where it, of course, also comes to what have you experienced in the past, what's your upbringing.
You're as well used to listening to.
Exactly,
because
absolutely.
You can get used to something that actually sounds badly, and then you don't appreciate this what sounds good.
Yes, and then that same mental game is on the listener side, because as you said, if you're in a hall, for example, where you have bad acoustics, then people that go to concerts but that are not maybe really experienced in these things will say, the piano sounded really bad today, because it was just simply a bad hall, right? Mm. But if you have that mental representation and lots of experience, then the human brain and the human is able to kind of filter out the data in order to make sense of it. In other words, this one sees in, for example, AI development a lot, that the computer as an objective thing can often in recordings not catch, or humans have to help it to catch that essence of human-made music, which means exactly that. The human brain knows how it should sound in an ideal case, and can then deduct that doesn't fit to this ideal representation, and therefore, for example, a very experienced pianist that also knows halls and so on and pianos will maybe have a completely different experience of the piano sound than somebody who just goes to concert and doesn't have that mental representation, because then the pianist could say, yeah, okay, but I hear that he did that. Look, he lifted here the pedal a little bit.
Pianist, if he's listening to a concert as a listener.
Yes, and if he has that mental representation of a great piano sound and what it takes and so on in it, then his brain will hear something different than another listener's brain.
Of course.
And this is something really, really hard to grasp at first, if I never thought about that.
Well, I hate to say that, but we have to again come back to the word awareness, which appears almost in every episode of our podcast. Because yet again, you have to be aware of what you know, of what you don't know, and what you should learn in order to experience more. And this is what I sometimes, actually very often, when I see something written or somebody speaking about performances, these self-proclaimed bloggers or some self-proclaimed critics, that they have no clue whatsoever. They didn't even think about how many details have to be considered to actually make any kind of judgment about the sound, about the piano.
Yeah, that's correct, and this is what I wanted to say when I didn't find the right English word. But this what I meant is that if you start questioning everything and think like, okay, what is there that I might not know, then it's of course also very stressful, and people fear that. It's not like this that one should. Yeah, I cannot judge now if a piano sound is great or not. One has to start judging and saying, actually, yes, I like that, and so, but always question why I like it and how it is, and then maybe reproduce things. Hear the same piano manufacturer from closer or in a different hall or something like this, and then make up your opinion and then change your opinion. Like you can once say, yeah, I like that, and then you learned more, and then you come back, no, that's horrible. It's funny that I liked it once. And that's okay if you know what took you from state A to state B.
Of course, absolutely.
Yes.
The self-awareness here.
Yes, because it's really tricky. It's really for, and I'm sure if one hears stories and one reads letters, that it was also for the greatest of the greats, it was every time difficult, because also they were not sure exactly how they sound there, how it will be going, but they had such a, and this, we again come to this mental representation, they had such a strong sense of what music should be in their hands or in their brain, that it came through. Like, yes, there were for sure times or recordings where they were very unhappy with what they just did, but still this essence was still there, and so great that probably, in the future, like now, I mean, for them in the future, like nowadays time, one thinks, wow, that was amazing. And it might have been a recording where he thinks, nah, this A3 was always too loud, it ruined my phrase here and there, but his representation of what he actually wanted to say, what he wanted to express, was so strong that these small details don't matter that much.
It's about the message in the end, yes. You mentioned before the difference between live performances and then studio recordings. And here I would like to mention something, because as well people forget about it, how the microphones are being set up. Because that also plays a role, a big role. How then later this recording sounds. I'm talking just about the sound, I'm not talking about the musical message here.
Of course, a lot, because I mean, with a great audio technician is probably subject to the same rules of artistic magic as a great piano technician, because how you set the microphones, in which hall and where, this is the essence. Like, because in great recordings, nowadays one doesn't even know how many microphones there are set often. In some halls there are few microphones and it sounds great because this hall needs just 2 or just 4. But sometimes there are whatever, 8, 10, 12, whatever in each corner and in the right direction and so just to catch this sort of illusion that is not really real. Because you can never have a great recording will always have a better sound than in the hall. Always. Because there's a person who actually dedicates his life to making it sound so beautifully that...
But again, also here, like with Stefan, in terms of piano technicians, you need someone with ears and with this amazing passion for sound perception, actually. So for the recording process,
Absolutely.
so audio technician.
Especially because on a good recording, you hear everything of the piano.
Yeah.
Like you hear each noise, each little thing that you would never hear in the hall.
And there are some audio technicians who are just putting 1 or 2 microphones in the piano or just very close, which then sounds terrible, you know. And
yeah,
this
of course. I mean, this is
but
amateurism.
Yes, but this unfortunately is all over the place.
Yeah, I know. And nowadays, of course, with in the times of social media and phone recordings and all that, this part doesn't get better, it gets worse. And people get used to that it sounds bad. Here again, mental representation and how it actually feels or sounds in the listener's perception.
Yeah, this is a fact. And then some people wonder why some artists are mad about being recorded
with phones.
As well because of that, because it's not the same. You just capture a sound, but you don't capture this particular sound or this particular essence of what this person, a musician, in that case a pianist, tells you from the stage with the piano.
Absolutely. Here we again have this clash of different perceptions, because if somebody doesn't perceive something, then it's non-existent for them. So if a listener is not aware of these details that the pianist actually wanted to convey, then he will not hear them and he will say, what's the problem? And the other one will say, you're crazy because I just did something magic.
And you don't hear it. First of all, I mean, the first step is just being aware that something exists. And then on top of that, you can be aware, I mean, you can then think if you hear it or you don't hear it, if you take that into consideration, that if you capture something with your phone, it will not sound the same.
Yeah. But of course, coming back again to the old school of piano, which we have to learn from, all pianists should, this musical mental representation of what the music should express was so strong as well that in these cases where this triggered when you talked about phone recordings, because usually phone recordings are more, or bad recordings are more coarse, so meaning you cannot find...
Simplified.
Yeah, you cannot hear all the fine-grained details and stuff. But yet, of course, a great piano interpretation should be above the coarse or fine layer of recording.
I'm talking here rather about this, that many artists, this real artists, or those ones that try to bring something special to public, and they actually care about how it sounds and how it comes across, and then they are being recorded.
Yes, no, that's absolutely true.
And then it's being posted all over the place, for
because
example.
Because yeah, absolutely, it happens all the time. But what I meant is, of course, that this, of course, more like the better a piano interpretation is, usually the higher levels of sound quality help that interpretation. So it will be better when the recording is better even. Yeah? But of course there are some people who also say, and some people who know, that say that great pianists of the past, like Cortot and people like that, they actually played also a bit like the technology standard of recordings were at their time. Mm-hmm. So in other words, they, because they made test recordings, right? I mean, they knew how they will sound on the tape or on the LP. Mm-hmm. And then they sort of adjusted their playing a bit, interpretation even, to what's gonna be hearable on these devices. And that's of course, we open another layer.
That's another layer.
But he did it so masterfully that, for example, some Koto recordings, I mean, you know, it's not important what's in the left hand, it's important what's in the right hand, which of course, most of the time.
Well, you paint a landscape. That's what you're doing, you know.
It's most of the time real like that, but they just knew it's not going to be hearable in detail anyway. So what do I care? I mean, I think there's no proof that he thought this way, but sometimes
it was about the message. It was not about the
exactly. And this is the
big
mental
picture.
This closes the circle to the mental representation I meant, because that's it. Once you know how the whole thing should be, you can.
From A to Z, you
yes,
see
you can just omit some small things that don't really matter, because that what matters has to be there.
And now people take a magnifying glass and try to prove that they know by not seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. The specialist of the second screw that has no clue about the first.
Exactly. This is a problem of our times. Pedals, you mentioned at the beginning.
Yes, I mean, this is an integral part of playing, and unfortunately also dismissed often in high-class piano education, because the pedal actually can...
maybe not dismissed, but as well, I think, simplified.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
By teachers.
When I say dismissed, I mean that because
they do teach.
Yeah, everybody knows how to press down a pedal and lift it.
But that's not about that.
But and the score tells you anyway where you have to press it, right? I mean, which is of course idiotic, because these composers had completely different pianos, completely different pedals, different strings, different dampers. Everything was different. So all the pedaling marks of a score has to be seen in musical terms. Like, one has to analyze why they put it in that particular spot. And only this analysis where you then understand, okay, he wanted actually to outline this tone and not that one. That's why he put the pedal there. Then if you know what they wanted, you can basically recreate how it should sound on a modern piano. Exactly. That's the only way, because otherwise you never know. If you pedal
Then we have some pianists that sometimes play on historical instruments and then on modern instruments, and they don't adjust.
They play exactly as on a concert Steinway.
Which is, yes.
Which sounds then like this. Yeah, but this anyway, I mean, if you go into historical pianos, then it opens a whole different can of worms, because of course many things were much easier on those instruments, technically even one understands then why some pianists of the 19th century or earlier wrote so difficult, because it was just simply easier to play on the historical ones. But
lighter.
Lighter, smaller, I mean narrower keys. Yes. And all these things, and different pedaling. Again, one could do many more things, but the whole technique has to be adjusted, would have to be adjusted. Nowadays, I don't know if it's even possible, because you would have to play hours and hours, years and years on historical pianos in order to develop these muscle movements in order to play them nicely, right?
Yeah, micro movements.
And if you do play on mostly modern pianos and then switch to historical ones, then if one would do it right, one would have to actually change the whole interpretation even. Not the essence maybe of musical things, because this should be hopefully known, but how this essence is put into which volume, which timing, which tempo, and all of that, so that it makes this. I have a personal story there for when I first played on this copy of Chopin's Buchholz piano. There was actually the first time I understood the bars in the E minor concerto of Chopin, when after the beginning of the pianist, when he and this up, it on this piano you could play it like rain, like something that is just from a different world. So an effect that you could never ever do on our pianos, on our modern pianos. So then it's like, of course, opens the question: what would Chopin do if he would wake up and he has a concert Steinway now? I mean, with if he had problems sometimes playing on Play-L, he would probably not be able to play on. Well, nowadays again, because they got lighter, like Steinways were much harder to play like 50, 60 years ago than now. But what he would do now nowadays with the capabilities that our pianos have, because
how would that influence as well his compositions?
Well, this is of course a different thing. You don't know. But let's say he wakes up and plays his own composed stuff on our pianos, because he can, because it's the same keys, right? I mean, same tonal keys. Then you simply don't know what he would do. Maybe he would probably, since composers usually have open minds, he would probably like and dig the thing that, wow, something new, something cooler, and then he would adjust to it. God knows how he would adjust to it, but it would definitely be a very different piano sound than on his pianos.
Yeah, he didn't have that chance to try Steinway, unlike Liszt, who did.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, Liszt was a bit more technically, let's say, not that he was technically better, but he probably was more bravura and more quick and loud, and then Chopin. So he had probably, one would assume, less problems to switch to a Steinway concert grand than Chopin would have, probably. But this is all assumption. One doesn't know. The fact is, if one nowadays with our fingers, with our hearings, plays such copies, and the emphasis is on copies, because if you play a well done copy, you have probably.
You mean of historical piano?
Yes, a copy of a historical piano. Then you probably have a closer, not the same because the wood's different and all this stuff, but you have a closer representation of what Chopin might have had than if you play an instrument that survived the passage of time, these 150 years or whatever it is, or more. And then the wood will be different, everything will be different, and then if you make a new action, then again you have the problem: who makes it, how makes it? And we know from Stefan Knüpfer how difficult it is to actually put a new action into an old piano.
How to copy the soundboard as well.
I remember that
yes,
was
exactly.
At the same visit, that topic where he actually
Incredible.
he invented a new way of building the parts that make the sound, the wooden parts, in the shapes that the old pianos need. And that's very complicated technique how he does it. Nobody does it this way, but only that way you can actually ensure that the piano sounds well. So what if you make a new action and you mess it up and you do it some wrong way, then you have a completely different piano than Chopin might have had or might have been happy with.
Yeah. This is the action part, so the
really tricky, yeah, the hammer and all that,
exactly.
What I explained.
And then on top of that we have the soundboard, which
and the
cannot
strings
be cracked,
and everything. And so this is really, it's really, as one sees, a very complex thing, that piano sound, but fascinating, because this is, at the end, it's like a voice. It should be like a personal voice. And the greatest pianists in history had their personal voice, no matter which piano they played, which is in and itself, as we said, somehow strange that this even works, but it does. And the rest is, the beauty that we live with every day, the sound beauty.